The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am your host, Benjamin Dixon. Today is Friday, May 8th, 2020. Thanks so much for joining me. This is going to be a jam-packed episode. I have an interview with Professor Ian Haney-Lopez. He is the author of Merge Left, as well as Dog Whistle Politics. I'll be speaking with him after the patron party. Also, unemployment numbers are out. Tara Reid interview with Megyn Kelly, which is actually worthwhile discussing. And of course, still dealing with the tragic murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And last night, the father and son duo, Greg and Travis McMichaels, they were finally arrested 74 days after they executed and lynched that young man in Brunswick, Georgia. 74 days. And as we discuss that shooting, it can't just be discussed in terms of the men who felt that they had the right to go and hunt down this young black man, but also the system that protected them for 74 days and, in fact, would still be protecting them if not for the video and the fact that the video went viral and a nationwide movement really to bring his killers to justice. This system protected those men for 74 days, and they still would be free right now if not for social media and all the people who got involved in this. So it's not just the murder. It's the fact that these murderers were protected by a system that ostensibly is designed to give equal justice before the law, but we know better. The district attorney in the city that's just outside of Brunswick where the murder took place, the district attorney's name is George Barnhill. And he released a letter shortly after the murders discussing why it was he was not going to press charges against the two. And in that letter, he concluded without any evidence that it was Ahmaud Arbery, the victim, that he was the one that was the aggressor. In fact, the letter, the statement called Arbery a quote unquote criminal suspect. And so without any evidence, the man who was dead got labeled as a criminal suspect by the district attorney of the city in which he was killed. So the very system that is ostensibly designed, I keep saying ostensibly because we know better, it is not designed to bring equal justice before the law, and this is case in point. This was designed to protect vigilantes who were killing black men. And it did so for 74 days. So he did this, the district attorney, George Barnhill, he accomplished this by, one, labeling Arbery, who was dead, as a criminal suspect. And the only thing that Arbery was guilty of was jogging through the neighborhood, being a black man jogging in broad daylight. And then Barnhill, the district attorney, went so far as to say that the Travis and Greg McMichaels, they were in hot pursuit of this criminal suspect. And then he justified it using Georgia law, saying that they had a reasonable suspicion and knowledge of a crime being committed. But they didn't have any evidence, any reasonable suspicion. In fact, they were operating based on a phone call from a third party who is soon to be arrested as well. They did this based on a phone call saying, hey, I think this guy is a robber, with no direct firsthand knowledge. And that phrase is critical. Firsthand knowledge. This is what the district attorney, who's supposed to be bringing equal justice before the law, this is what he injected into the conversation on the behalf of his good old boys, his good friends, Greg and Travis McMichael. He injected into the conversation and in his formal capacity as district attorney, the idea that these two vigilantes had firsthand knowledge of a crime being committed by Arbery when they did not. And then, for good measure, he went on to say that Arbery had a history of mental health problems, or I want to say it precisely. He said a history of mental health. Well, shit, all of us have a history of mental health, but he also said a criminal history. And so far, the only thing, nothing is coming up significant at all whatsoever in terms of a criminal history. But even if it was something in Arbery's criminal past that was criminal, that does not justify. There's no way those two men would know about it at the time. And I feel like I should not have to say that, because common sense says, this is what people do all the time. I swear to God, people try to justify their crimes after the fact. In fact, there are people who, anyway, I'll leave it alone. There are people who use anything they can, no matter the timeline. Tell me how those two men would know anything about this man's history of mental health, whatever the hell that means, and any knowledge of this quote unquote criminal past, which all of them, nothing sounds like it's anything beyond a misdemeanor, if anything at all. Like, no one has been able to affirmatively state that he even had a criminal past. And so here the district attorney, George Barnhill, who is supposed to be bringing equal justice before the law, in his official capacity as district attorney, he justified not arresting those two men because he exonerated them on the spot, and he did so by saying that Arbery was a criminal suspect and lying and saying that the pair, Greg and Travis McMichaels, had firsthand knowledge of Arbery committing a crime which made their actions legal under state law, under Georgia law. So it wasn't until 74 days later that these two got arrested, and only because the video shows us that here's a black man just running in the street, jogging in the middle of the day, being hunted down by three white men, gunned down in the streets. Oh, I left one thing out. In this letter that George Barnhill sent, he also stated that it was Arbery who attacked the McMichaels. And the video says completely otherwise. And mind you, Barnhill, the district attorney, released this statement, this 3-page letter. I shared it on my Twitter timeline. You can find it anywhere on the internet. He shared this he published this 3-page letter after viewing the same video that you and I saw. So it wasn't that he was trying to get away with something and then, oops, here's the evidence. It was he looked dead into the eyes of the evidence and said, I don't care. We are going to fix this for Bubba and them, for our boys. And he did so by vilifying the deceased. He did so by fudging the facts, being very generous, outright lying. And it took 74 days. So in addition to these two men being arrested, I think justice calls for George Barnhill to not only be fired, but also arrested for filing a false report, or this statement, using, if not a false report, using the capacity of his office to obstruct justice. But this is where we are in America. Yesterday, I finally got the piece out for The Guardian about Ahmaud Arbery. And it dawned on me that the real underlying problem here, one of them is many problems that we're facing, is because there is a long history in this country of using racism as a means of justifying how America treats black people, and included in that toolkit of white supremacy is the vilification of blackness. And I know this because ask yourself the question, when these two men imagined using their guns to exact some type of vigilante justice, what color skin were all of the quote unquote thugs in their imaginations? In other words, when Americans, particularly white Americans, have ideations and daydream about being vigilante heroes, what color skin do you think the victims, or to them, the quote unquote thugs, the enemy, what color skin do you think they have? Guarantee you it's going to overwhelmingly be black skin or brown skin. They're either going to see themselves as being the hero by taking down the black thug or the brown terrorist. That's what they have dreams and fantasies of. How do I know? How do I know this? I mean, because when they play cops and robbers, don't think for a minute that they don't see in their eyes, in their imagination, the actual culprit or the robber that they have in their mind. They're not going to see themselves as the criminal. Case in point, the movie, The Brave One with Jodie Foster. I will never, ever forget being in that theater on opening night. I don't know. I just thought I wanted to see it sitting there. And as Jodie Foster evolved, and her character arc took her from being this mild-mannered radio host to being an all-out vigilante, the very first people she killed were two big and scary black men. And at that moment in the theater, full of men who matched the exact demographic of Greg and Travis McMichaels, that theater erupted with the same level of uproarious applause as us nerds when Captain America lifted up Thor's hammer and smashed Thanos with it. You remember that clip. You heard how the theater cheered and erupted. That's how the theater filled with men who matched the age and race of Greg and Travis McMichaels celebrated when Jodie Foster shot two black men in that vigilante movie. So you tell me, when Americans dream of vigilante justice, who are the villains in their imaginations? You know the answer just like I do. All right. So much more to cover. I just want America to keep that same energy up, that same Second Amendment energy up when black people start protecting themselves. But anyway, so much more to cover. We're going to do this patron party. I don't care how angry you are in the first segment, we're going to always do the patron party as a good way to reset myself, as well as a way of thanking our patrons. And then immediately after that, I'll be speaking with Professor Ian Haney-Lopez. So we'll be back right after this.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Here we go. Very special welcome and thank you to all of our newest patrons, without whom this show is not possible. Shout out and welcome to Brian Shugnitsi. Thank you for becoming a patron. Christopher Michael, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Adrian Lowry, thank you for becoming a patron. Hey, bounce. That's it. Nate P, thank you for becoming a patron. Robert Hughes, thank you for becoming a patron. Kitty M, thank you, Kitty, for becoming a patron. Mark Shepard, thank you for becoming a patron. Tasheen Rana, thank you for becoming a patron. And last but not least, Bo Webb, thank you for becoming a patron. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you get uncut, unfiltered, unedited interviews, twice the content without any of the advertisements like you'll get right here.
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at www.thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. I am excited to welcome my next guest, Ian Haney-Lopez. He is the Chief Justice Earl Warren Professor of Public Law at the University of California, Berkeley. He works in the area of racial justice in American law. He is also the author of several books: Merge Left, Fusing Race and Class, Winning Elections and Saving America. That is his most recent book. He has an upcoming book called Dog Whistle Politics. Professor Lopez, thanks so much for joining me today. I have followed your work for some time. And in fact, one of the supporters of the show, Kyle Campion, he reached out to me last week and asked if I can contact you to get on the show. And I'm just pleased that you were so quickly able to come and join this conversation on race and class and everything that's going on around us. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, absolutely. Delighted to be in conversation with you and your supporters.
Absolutely. I want to start with an interview that you did pretty recently. I believe it was in April. And I shared the quote on my Twitter timeline because it just really resonated with me. And I think this is a good place to start our conversation. You said this in your interview with David Bean. You said, the material advantages of being white have turned decisively negative. What does whiteness earn you materially? It earns you a corrupt government organized to help the billionaires that is busy trying to take healthcare away from your family, that's busy trying to bust your unions, that's busy trying to strip money out of the infrastructure, that is corrupt and incompetent. That's what it gets you when you organize your political identity around being white. And then you simply said, so stop. Now, to give a little context, this was in a broader conversation about race, class, politics, and the strategy that the Republican Party has used for many years, using racism as an organizing tool for power, for political power. Can you speak on that quote in particular, but then also the broader conversation?
Well, I think let's start with the broader point. We so often think about race as whites against people of color, and obviously, that's a huge dynamic, a hierarchy that places whites above people of color and that creates hierarchies among people of color and even among whites. And so, yeah, on one level, it makes sense to think about it that way. But on another, when we think about it as conflicts between groups, we stop asking the important questions of who benefits and how, and who's really funding this and who's really promoting it. But those questions are so important, especially today, 2016, 2020, with this election, because this is a moment when the curtain is lifting and we can really look behind who's funding racism and who profits from it and what's their motive. If you look at somebody like Donald Trump, is he a bigot? Probably. He's got an ugly history. Is that why he does what he does? Not really. Not mainly. Mainly, further, deeply, fundamentally, Donald Trump promotes racism in this country because it's a billionaire's trick. It's a con job. If he can get a majority of whites anxious and fearful and pointing their finger at black and brown people, he can distract them from seeing the way in which he's rigged even coronavirus relief so that it mainly benefits billionaires. That's the real deal here. And now, when we can see it about Trump, it helps us expand our vision so that we can see that this is actually what the Republican Party, formerly known as the Party of Big Business, has been doing ever since the Civil Rights era. They adopted in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, a strategy of building a popular support for their party, for the Party of Big Business, by helping to create white racial fear, anxiety, and resentment.
Yeah. Yep. That anxiety, that fear, and that resentment, would you agree that those were easily weaponizable tools because of how deeply rooted racism is and has been in this country for years, and done so in such an insidious fashion that I believe even you said one time that it was so insidious that the Democrats did not feel that they had an effective way to fight back against it. So instead, they started to leverage their own version of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. So this is such a great question. We can go all the way back and say, where does race come from? Because this idea of blacks or browns or yellows or whites is fundamentally distinct. That's an idea that's about 400 years old, which is another way of saying the modern understandings of races arise at the same time as modern capitalism and colonialism, and they're deeply linked. You think about what were the stories that Europeans needed to tell themselves to explain why it was okay to come to the Americas and take land from people who had cities, who had towns, who had languages and religions. What made that okay? that was a story of race. And what made it okay to turn a European system of unfree labor into a system of slavery by descent, so that people were held in bondage for life, and their children for life, and their grandchildren for life, and so on indefinitely? That was the notion of race. And so these two combined, put differently, racism gets its start as a way for certain people to explain why they can use violence and fraud to take from others and to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of the few. That's what it's always been about. Now, once you get that system going, then racism becomes this powerful force, sometimes this independent force. A lot of people become invested in it. People they're looking for status. They're looking for hierarchy. Why can I feel proud of myself? Who am I in this society? So it becomes available as a weapon. We're still living that history now. Racism is still available for the powerful and the few to wield in a way that allows them to concentrate wealth and power in their own hands while tearing apart society for the rest of us.
Right, right. So to me, then that begs the question that goes a little bit further in my mind, because for so many people, racism does not yield any material benefit. It goes back to the quote that I started off with, like anyone who is not wealthy, who's not a billionaire, for them, racism actually yields a negative material benefit, to use your words exactly. So would it seem as though that there's like this two-tier relationship with racism in this country? Those who use it as a strategic tool to amass wealth and power to themselves, and then those everyone else who, it just appeals to them for, some type of grievance politics, but it doesn't yield them any type of material benefit. What do you think about that?
I think so. So I think we cannot separate racism as a sort of a cultural phenomena, as an inherited phenomena, from racism as a tool of the rich. And to sharpen that point, to take it out of the field of abstraction, think about Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
Fox News is the brainchild of a Republican operative, deeply invested in rule by the rich, who comes of age politically in this context of the Republican Party using racism as a wedge issue to break apart working class whites and African Americans, who are core parts of the New Deal coalition. He comes of age through that experience, and then he says, "I'm going to start this news channel, and the main thing this news channel is going to peddle is fear and anxiety and racist stories."
Mm-hmm.
Now you think about, well, poor whites, rural America, what are they doing? They're consuming Fox News 24/7. Or they're listening to Rush Limbaugh, or they're clicking on Breitbart.com. You have an entire industry funded by dark money, by the Mercers, by the Koch brothers, by the Coors family. The wealthiest elements, some of the wealthiest, most reactionary elements of our society are funding a media ecosystem that is constantly telling white folks, your real enemy are black and brown people. They're coming to get you. They're going to take your jobs. They're bringing disease. They're rapists. They're murderers.
Right.
You need to go buy a gun and vote Republican. And when they do, they get Donald Trump, Steve Mnuchin, a cabinet full of billionaires that basically runs the country for billionaires.
Right, right. But when we see the buy-in that transcends like the Fox News, right, and the Rush Limbaugh, and like the steady connection throughout American history of racism within communities that don't benefit from that racism. And then when we have the conversation about finding ways of overcoming that to create solidarity amongst working people, which requires overcoming that racism. How would we overcome something that people have bought into, even at the expense of their material benefit? Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. It totally makes sense. And you're asking exactly the right question. Let's start this way. People fundamentally are self-interested, not in the sort of coldly calculating just me, but in the deeper, in some sense, more moral sense of how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my family?
Yeah.
And they're evaluating just about everything you say to them against that basic question. How am I going to take care of myself and my family? That means being realistic. That means if people think racism is good for them and their family, they will find a way to justify defending and supporting racial hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reality that we've been living for hundreds of years. And let me just make it clear, this isn't an indictment of white people. You think about communities of color. I mean, we're so diverse and people are occupying so many different positions. Some groups are lighter, can make a claim to be closer to white.
Mm-hmm.
Even within our communities, some of us are lighter, more professional, higher status, can make a claim on racial privileges that others of us cannot. People are seeking a way forward for themselves and their families. And if that way forward seems to be supporting and taking advantage of racial hierarchy, people will do that of all colors. That means that if we want to end racism, we need to make it clear to people that they and their families benefit more by fighting racism and by forming a cross-racial coalition. And the benefits need to be concrete and visible. We can make that claim in 2020, but that's the claim we have to make. We have to show people that they are better off by repudiating racism and working with people of other skin colors, other ethnicities, other nationalities to take power back from the corrupt few and the crooked corporations. Mm-hmm. I think we can make that point. But notice this is fundamentally a pragmatic point. It's fundamentally saying, at the end of the day, if you want to make sure that your union job is preserved, your pensions are preserved, there's infrastructure, there's decent school, there's clean water, you need to stop pointing the finger across racial lines, stop investing in pride about being lighter skinned or having citizenship, start thinking about how you actually build sufficient political power to vote out the politicians who divide us and then rule for the billionaires, and to instead elect politicians who realize that they depend for their position on a broad, multiracial, progressive coalition. That's the conversation we have to have.
There's so much more to the interview. We discussed at length the Democratic Party's culpability in this, how they are in some ways complicit with the Republican Party using race as a political strategy. We go into great detail. Professor Ian Haney-Lopez goes into great detail. That portion is going to be after the closing music. There's a couple of other topics that I have to hit on the public show. But if you want access to the full interview, the full show, as always, the full hour show, you can go to patreon.com/the BPD show. And I have also uploaded the interview uncut and unedited, so you can get it without any musical interludes and just listen to it in its entirety. I want to discuss the unemployment numbers that came out yesterday. And I know there's a lot going on in the country, but 3.2 million people filed for unemployment last week, bringing the total number up to 33 million who have lost their jobs since March. That's just in a 2-month period. We are at 14.7, around 15% unemployment in this country. And we have not seen those numbers since the Great Depression. So we have officially entered into Depression era levels of unemployment. And yet neither party is doing anything to protect the people. We don't expect people to force them back out into the plague. To see, it's not that we're surprised that at this unemployment. In a way, this unemployment was going to be inevitable because people had to go home and shelter in place. What we're surprised with, and we shouldn't be, but we still are, right, is the fact that this government is not doing anything to provide for those people beyond the basic unemployment benefits. And all of the bailout money that we've seen to this point, the trillions of dollars in bailout, have gone to the wealthy, to the elite, to the corporations, to bail out the market. Americans are even discussing bailing out not only the healthcare industry. Democrats are proposing that, but also they're discussing bailing out lobbyists. I think if there's any group of people that we can all have bipartisan disdain for, it would be the lobbyists who swarm around Washington, D.C. looking for handouts for corporations. Now they're looking for handouts for themselves amidst Depression era level unemployment. And we haven't done anything meaningful for the people. This is a grim reality. And I keep saying this, but I want to keep driving it home. This is a complete abdication of the duty of the government to both protect us from death, right? What's the point of the government? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are pushing people back out to their deaths for the profit margins of corporations. And now we are looking at all of the people who are unemployed and saying, and even the Republicans are upset about the fact that we got unemployment insurance up to $600 a week. Because there's a couple of people who are making more from unemployment than they made when they were working. When the vast majority of people find that unemployment is entirely too low. When I was getting unemployment, it was like $200 a week, right? And this was just 2 years ago. Okay. So $600 a week still would not be enough to pay all of my bills, but it would have definitely helped. And this is what is infuriating. Like, Republicans are completely outraged about this. But no, the Democrats, you don't get off scot-free, because where are you in terms of the health care of these individuals? Where are you in terms of making sure that these people can feed their kids and their children throughout this pandemic? Well, we know where everyone is. They are doing politics as usual, as we as a nation have crossed into the Depression era levels of unemployment. Food lines across the country, bread lines, literal bread lines. People are not able to feed their families, and our politicians are acting as if it is business as usual.
We'll make it up. You put us together. We'll make it up. You put us together. We'll make it up. You put us together.
Do you believe we should believe all women?
I believe in the survivors that have come forward, like Blasey Ford and the other ones that have come forward. I do stand with them. I think that there needs to be a conversation rather than a hashtag.
Are you in favor of the conversation? I mean, does Joe Biden get due process? Does he get the chance to vet these claims and defend himself? Is that okay?
I think he's been doing that, right? He's had a chance for more platforms than I have.
If I can just go back for 1 second to Blasey Ford.
Yes.
Some of those who supported her but now have found a reason not to support you say, well, she was under oath. Would you go under oath?
Absolutely.
They say, well, she subjected herself to cross-examination. Would you do that?
Absolutely.
They also point out that she took a polygraph controlled by someone on her team. Is that something you want to do?
I'm not a criminal. Joe Biden should take the polygraph. What kind of precedent does that set for survivors of violence? Does that mean we're presumed guilty and we all have to take polygraphs? So I will take one if Joe Biden takes one. But I'm not a criminal.
That was Tara Reade on, I don't particularly care for the host that she was talking with, Megyn Kelly, but, because CNN and MSNBC and all these other outlets pretend as though this person doesn't exist, that Tara doesn't exist, she has to go where she has to go. This thing operates on several levels. This is a multi-tiered thing that's happening. Tara Reade is watching. Listen, I know what it's like to watch someone who has caused you a lifetime of harm rise and get the spotlight and succeed. And Tara Reade is sitting here watching someone who she says has hurt her, assaulted her, sexually assaulted her, now rising to the office of the presidency. People have asked why she didn't say anything in 2008. I don't know that that's completely true, but I do know that she said that she wanted to protect President Obama because she believed in his campaign. I mean, that is as reasonable of an answer that you could possibly get. That's one level of this. And she should pursue justice as she sees fit, right? I'm saying it that way because there's another level to this that doesn't really have anything to do with her getting justice. And that's kind of the lens that I am most disappointed in. Is the response from the Democratic Party and the Me Too movement. Now, we've gone over that pretty extensively on this show. But this is a black eye on the Me Too movement. And this just shows you the depth of the depravity that is going on in the leadership of the Democratic Party, the establishment of the Democratic Party, the willingness to completely turn their back on an entire movement and use the same language that just 2 years ago they were screaming at the top of the lungs about Brett Kavanaugh. They're using the same language and the same excuses. And to me, it has been the most depressing signifier that the Democratic Party had never had any intention of dealing with us in good faith from the beginning. That they're so easy and so willing, rather, to turn their backs on a movement that was a critical movement in terms of changing the narrative in this country with regard to sexual assault. The Democrats have just basically said, F it. We don't care. That's the lens that, and regardless, and the reason I separate the two is because regardless of whether or not Tara Reade actually is able to hold Joe Biden accountable, the damage to the Democratic Party is done. Right? Like, I see Tara Reade's like, go ahead, sis, and do what you got to do and keep doing it. But the damage to the Democratic Party is done. Yeah, how could you look at any of them ever again? And the damage to the Me Too movement is done. Done. How can any of us look at the Me Too movement or the Democratic Party and say that they actually care about sexual assault against women? I don't think anybody be willing. There have been a couple of people who said that, listen, I believe her, but I'm still going to vote for Joe Biden because that's just, that's just the score. That's just what we have to do. I mean, believe it or not, that is actually a genuine and, that is a quality take compared to everything else that's being said. The people are calling her a Russian operative. The people who are just saying that she's outright lying. The people who are attacking her looks. The people who are just all the way around the board. They're doing every insidious attack that they hated to see the Republicans use when Republicans were trying to protect Brett Kavanaugh. Democrats have employed it themselves. So, again, I don't know what's going to be the outcome for Tara personally, what she's looking for, whatever the case may be. That's, I'm glad she's got the platform to at least tell the story of her abuser, right? At least tell the story of the person in her life who has harmed her, who is now getting ready to ascend to the highest office in the land. At least she has an opportunity to say that. But regardless of the outcome, whether Joe Biden is elected or not, the damage is done to the Democratic Party and the Me Too movement.
What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?
Wow. I did not intend to make something that dope. Jesus Christ. Rewind that and go back and listen to that again. The indomitable James Baldwin. How much time is it going to take for your progress? That's the end of the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. And non-gender conforming individuals, thank you for being a beautiful audience. As always, there's more after the music for patrons. The rest of the interview with Professor Ian Haney Lopez. That's immediately after the music, along with a couple of other topics and conversations. If you want access to that, go to patreon.com/the BPD show. Otherwise, have a wonderful and as beautiful of a weekend as you possibly can have. I will see you Monday.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com Facebook.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.